Every chapter of Life is Strange Double Exposure is now available, and thanks to Square-Enix, I was able to play it early. This video will be broken up into 3 distinct segments: a standard overview in the first half and a review with no major spoilers, and then a distinct secondary segment with minor spoilers, followed by a third segment with open major spoilers. There will be a huge warning before the spoilers, don't worry. This overview is going to be almost identical to my last video, but with a couple of changes and additions based on my later experiences. Let's get right into it. This is a narrative adventure game that I'd describe as a sort of fantasy murder mystery. The central plot revolves around Max Caulfield, a girl who, in the wake of the death of a close friend, unlocks the power to shift between 2 timelines, one where her friend is dead and one where her friend is still alive. The gameplay mostly consists of you controlling Max as she explores the areas in and around the campus of Caledon University, which is also her place of employment. As you explore the game's world, you can examine basically any point of interest in the environment, and Max details her thoughts through a very extensive internal monologue. The environments in this world are very detailed and realistic too, and there's a lot of moments where the game just kind of chills and lets you breathe, especially given that there's a lot of heavy subject matter. There are just all these little moments where Max can do something like, for example, just sit down and drink her cafe drink, while it cycles through shots of the environment and some chill, relaxing music plays. Moments like these, along with the fact that you can inspect basically anything you want, are actually really refreshing during a time where it seems like most games are trying to move at a breakneck pace. Like, you could just beeline from objective to objective, but there's no punishment for taking it at your own pace and just kind of immersing yourself in the world. There's another fun thing I noticed too. During one of the cutscenes in Max's house, you can see a random person just walking about outside in the background. Not an important character, just a totally random, insignificant, yet realistic depiction of reality. And you don't see most games do this. I know a lot of other people don't really care about stuff like this, but if you look at any of my other videos, you'll know that the extra attention to detail like this is exactly the kind of thing I look for in games. And speaking of immersion, there's a whole phone interface where Max regularly receives text messages from a variety of characters, along with a straight-up social media app where you can post photos that you've taken throughout the narrative and see what everyone else is up to in what feels almost like real time. This is already cool on the surface, but they took it to the next level by completely changing what you see in your text messages and on the social media timeline, depending on which, timeline you're in, starting from the point of convergence on the day of the murder. This is a ridiculously cool detail that absolutely had to have been a nightmare to add for the developers, since it pretty much doubles the writing workload. This is again one of those details that drives home just how much this game can suck you in with its immersion and suspension of disbelief despite the crazy timeline shifting stuff. And to segue a little bit, the art direction for the characters is super unique. The characters are realistic, however in a style that kinda toes the line between being hyper-real and cartoonish, but it still makes the super realistically animated faces work super well. Characters are really expressive, not only in their speech and mouth movements, but even in their eyes and the tiny details like subtle winces and welling up of tears. Couple that with super realistic, well-delivered dialogue, and you have what almost feels like an entertaining live-action TV show playing out right in front of you. But now let's talk gameplay. The way Max's shifting ability works is incredibly interesting because at any given time, you're in one of 2 timelines, living or dead. Using the right bumper or R1, you can activate the shift ability to get a big AoE preview of the differences between the 2 timelines, shown as this sort of colored apparition. There's all kinds of natural differences like the placement and movements of people, which people are there, and of course environmental and object differences too. So for example, in the dead timeline, you might see an object or person in the alive timeline who isn't there, and vice versa. However, Max can also listen in on the environment, opening the door for some really interesting uses of her powers, like gathering intel she normally wouldn't be able to without being detected. And of course, she can use this power to get into places she normally can't get to either. If a door is locked in one timeline but not in the other, you can simply shift to the timeline where it's unlocked, walk through, then shift back if there's a shift point available. And yeah, you can't just shift literally anywhere, you have to do it inside of these energy field things called shift points. You can use your power to see the surrounding environment anywhere though, and the shift points are frequent enough that you may as well be able to shift anywhere anyways. Plus, the placement of the shift points seem to kinda have a tie to the story, though only loosely. There's so many unique and fun ways the shift mechanic is used, and seeking out all the little differences between each timeline is a lot of fun and sucked up a lot of my playtime here. I legitimately spent at least half the time I was playing this game just walking around examining things, which isn't at all required, but you're definitely rewarded for it with world building and, from what I can tell, more hints to the overall mystery behind the game's story. Also, when you start the game, there's a healthy number of accessibility options, including some that pleasantly surprised me, like content warnings for a variety of things including loud sounds, bright lights, and sensitive topics. Of course, anyone who is familiar with games like this knows that there's also a big element of choice, and the choices you make seem to have a pretty big rippling effect on the story. And I'm gonna be real, some of these choices are hard. I won't go into them too much because I don't want to spoil anything, but I just want to say that one of the choices this game made me make was hard enough that I had to stop playing for like 10 10 minutes to consider it, and I can't wait to see how other people handled it. And later on in the game, there were a couple of more decisions where I just didn't know what to do, and I want to go back and replay it and find out what I missed out on. Just know that the choices definitely feel impactful, and it's really nice that you get a breakdown of how everyone else chose at the end of the chapter. Speaking of choices, you also get a choice as to what Max wears indoors and outdoors. Of course, this version of the game came with the Final Fantasy outfit, so why wouldn't I choose those? Still, overall, the biggest draw for me is looking at all the differences between the two different timelines. It's really cool, and only made cooler by the whole mystery angle, because you get clues as to what's behind the mystery, and the clues can change between timelines. Not only that, but on top of each timeline having its own set of text messages and social media posts, even Max's relationship with specific people can change between the different timelines depending on the actions that she's taken that the player has control of. So now I need to address one more thing. This is my first Life is Strange game, but not the first Life is Strange. Now, I'm not going to spoil any of the other Life is Strange games yet, but I will warn anyone going into this that this game definitely spoils the first one. That being said, I was just blown away by this game, and I now own every single Life is Strange game and plan to play through all of them to make a retrospective soon. Don't worry. However, I will also say that as someone who hasn't played the previous games, there's a level of mystique that this game instills. Max's backstory is left not vague, but definitely open to a bit of interpretation, which seems to be by design since the original game could have ended in more than one way. This for me actually enhanced the storytelling of this game. I enjoyed the atmosphere of mystery, and having part of Max's life entangled in that mystery for me as a player makes the experience feel a lot more unique, and there hasn't been a single time in the game where I felt like I was missing out in any major way either. Like, I'll bet I'd have a much bigger appreciation for some of the references and callbacks to the first game if I had played it, but I'm still enjoying this as a standalone experience, and there's only a couple of times in the later story where specific events from the first game are referenced in a way that might confuse someone, but I think there's enough context by the very end that the confusion should be totally resolved. The game isn't totally isolated from the first game, but I can confidently say that it stands on its own, and I could easily recommend this to people like me with no previous experience with the franchise. But overall, what I think I really like about this game in general is how it balances realism with more fantastical elements. Max is warping between two realities all the time, but my sense of immersion and feeling like this is a realistic world is never broken. So without spoiling anything, my verdict on this game is that it has very quickly pushed its way into possibly one of my top 10 games of all time. This game blew me away, and I highly recommend it to basically anyone who likes narratively driven games. There's a lot to love here, and if you're a fan or new to the series, I recommend this either way. I do have a couple of story criticisms, but those are spoilers, and to spoil my spoilers, they really boil down to just kinda nitpicks at best. But yeah, if you wanted my overall opinions without spoilers, this is where you should stop watching the video. I'll quickly thank my patrons and channel members though, including That's Ash and Oh My Meg in the Played Every Game tier, along with all of these absolutely wonderful people you see on your screen. Thanks so much for the support, but hey, it's time to get into some spoiler territory, okay? So alright, if you're someone who doesn't want to have anything at all spoiled, now is the time to stop watching this, because I'm about to talk about some things that may be considered spoilers. I'm gonna give you like 10 seconds to click away. How you doing today, by the way? I hope you're well. Also remember, I'm definitely about to spoil the heck out of Life is Strange Double Exposure. Alright, if you're still here, it means you're totally cool with spoilers. Just letting you know, here we go, spoiler time! First, I want to talk about an additional game mechanic that's introduced at the end of Chapter 2, which is Max's ability to make objects trade places between timelines. This mechanic seemed like it had a lot of promise, but it ended up only being used a few times in my playthrough, and from what I can remember, all of those times were in cutscenes. This ability had a lot of potential, ranging from new puzzle opportunities to the implications of possibly sending people across timelines. I really expected them to do more with it, but they didn't, and I'm not sure if it's something we will see in the future either. I'm not upset about it or anything. The existing mechanics were fun and fulfilling, but I can't help to imagine what kind of possibilities there would be if the mechanic was fleshed out more. But now I also have to talk about The Thing. As I mentioned earlier, I went into this game as someone who didn't play the original Life is Strange beforehand, or any of them for that matter. But I've seen a lot of discourse about how Max and Chloe's relationship is addressed here. I'm about to spoil the first Life is Strange, just letting you know, but if you're at this point in the video, then you probably don't care. The game allows you to choose whether or not you saved Chloe or saved the town at the end of the first game through a conversational choice pretty early on. The issue is, no matter which choice you pick, Max and Chloe are no longer together by this point. This led to a lot of people feeling as though their feelings and choices from the first game were kind of invalidated, especially if they were attached to Chloe specifically. The outrage was apparently compounded by the fact that this conversation choice segues into Max finding a new romantic interest with a brand new character. As someone who admittedly doesn't have the same attachment to Chloe because I didn't play through the first game yet, I have to admit that the significance of this choice went totally over my head the first time around until I saw the outrage online. Obviously, I knew that this choice was the player deciding which ending they chose for the first game, but I didn't realize everything else, the stuff people are upset about. But I'm gonna get some flack for this. I actually kinda like the new love interest. Amanda's super likable, realistic, and someone who seems like they're genuinely interested in Max. Will I change my mind about this after playing the first game? Maybe, but I honestly kinda doubt it. But I just want to stress that I don't think this one criticism that some passionate fans have should drag the entire game down. The story here is so good. It's really gripping too. I was unable to put this game down until the very end. I played through the whole thing in one day. And I hope that people who are upset by that one decision still at least give the game's wider story a chance. It's really good, everybody. But now we're gonna get into the big spoilers. If you don't want to know some really big stuff, please stop watching now. I have never on my channel said stop watching, but I am about to say a couple of things that are massive spoilers. Let me be clear, I won't be recapping the whole game's story here, nor will I be listing off all the major events. But if you don't know what happens in this game, you might get a bit lost. Just warning you. So I have two main criticisms that I want to talk about with this story. First, a big part of the plot early on involves a detective, Alderman, investigating the murder and holding both Max and Moses as possible suspects. There's a whole secondary thread of people seeing doppelgangers of themselves wandering around the campus, and eventually this culminates with Alderman seeing himself from another timeline. And when he touches that doppelganger, he violently disappears from reality, and we eventually find out that he was completely erased from ever having been born? That's an insane concept, right? Here's the issue though. This whole doppelganger being erased from reality thing is touched on over the course of the entire game up to that point, but then it just doesn't go anywhere. In fact, as soon as Alderman disappears, this doppelganger thing is kinda only ever important for like a split second toward the end of the game. It definitely feels like it was supposed to play a more major role, and maybe my choices in the game affected how much I got to see of it? I have no idea, honestly. I really hope that if this game gets a sequel though, that plot thread can get revisited, but given how this one ends, I'm not so sure that can happen. But the second thing I wanted to address is how the game actually ends, and I mean post-credits, not the events of the actual ending. Without going into too much detail, they do this kind of Marvel-style Avengers superhero setup thing, where someone is finding people with powers and sort of trying to get them to team up. Now, I like how relatively grounded the story is overall in this game, and I don't really know how they're gonna tackle this going forward. I kind of enjoy how these powers seem to tie more into people's personalities and insecurities. Like, Max's ability to shift between timelines feels like it's a reflection of her desire to see her friend again, right? I guess this is a roundabout way of me saying that I am really cautiously optimistic about this expansion of the superpower stuff, and I really hope that it doesn't lead to people flying and shooting laser beams and all that. That would really lose a lot of the charm and magic that this game captured. But yeah, to close this out, despite these two small nitpicks, this game is still incredible, and I can't recommend it enough. Please give this game a shot if you're at all interested. That's why I tried not to spoil everything. But hey, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, have a fantastic day.